Oh boy, today on the Quinns Patreon, we're talking about romance and sex. Two things that for me, and I'm sure for you, involve hydration and paperwork. This is just my script. It's my script. But because there's going to be no B-roll in this video, I feel okay having it in front of me like a newscaster. Now, I'm aware that when YouTubers traditionally do a video on sex, it's usually in the form of some kind of apology video. I'm a little worried that I'm doing that but backwards, in that I'm doing this video for no reason, but this video in and of itself will create a scandal. Let's find out. Right. Let's get it started in here. Let's get it. Oh my God. So I got back into role-playing about 4 years ago, starting a campaign of Spire for my friends that I would go on to do a review about on Shut Up and Sit Down. This was me role-playing for 5 people who'd played a lot of D&D, but I had to bring them into learning about other games. You know, the kind of games that you see on Quinns Quest, the games that are a little less about combat and loot and a little more about character, story, or investigations, or problem solving. People who are into the poly or kink communities watching this, who are just in love with the fact that I've started this video on romance with something that looks like an NFL strategy diagram, they're like, hell yeah. So when I was running that Spire campaign with me and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players, I set myself a goal, something I've never done before as a GM. I said, I will have succeeded with this group onboarding them into the new world of story games if I can make any of these 5 players characters kiss one another. Now, I'm aware that this sounds sketchy. Well, it is sketchy. It's totally sketchy. I would encourage you guys to never, ever do that. But I truly do think I was onto something really important. And in this video, I would like to talk about where my head was at and what I would strongly encourage you folks to do instead. So my thinking was as follows, right? Me and my friends who were sat around this very table together, we were now engaging with a hobby where we tell stories together, right? And you simply cannot have stories without either love or romance or sex. Like Warhammer 40,000, right? The big brand in geek fandom where the unique selling point is that in the grim darkness of the future, there is only war. There's also sex. Someone somewhere is selling the Slanesh cultists and the Drakari eyeliner and hair extensions. Someone decided that the military haircut for the Sisters of Battle was bleached bangs. Everything you love, all of it, has love and sex in it. Your favorite movie, your favorite TV show, your favorite book, your favorite manga, your favorite music, your favorite actual play show, your favorite ancient myth. For our hobby to be willing to pave over this is fucking insane. Even your favorite modern movies, which are just vehicles for action and spectacle, like your Mission Impossibles and your John Wicks, need to remind you that you're not seeing this protagonist in love now, but they were in love once, okay? They were a sexual being once, and they will be again. They're just heartbroken right now. So if what we're trying to do with this hobby is tell great stories together, how great can our stories really be if we're too awkward to look at the single biggest pillar, euphemism intended, of human storytelling, the biggest human emotion, love? I'll go further. How can we even consider ourselves storytellers if we're averting our gaze whenever the idea of this happens, as if someone we fancy has come into a party and we're a bunch of squirming Mormons? There's also an extent to which, if we choose not to bring romance into our stories, we are voluntarily keeping this hobby locked in its male, heterosexual, basement-dwelling past, because heterosexual men are, of course, the one demographic that romance is not marketed to. For as long as the role-playing community continues to broadcast this message that sex is not welcome at the role-play table, we are, unintentionally, broadcasting a message that this hobby is for dudes. And that's so self-defeating, because if dudes can change this about the hobby, then dudes can have a better time too. Like, I don't know how many people watching this video have watched Critical Role, but the romance and the sex in season 1 of that show is some of the best stuff in it. It can be some of the best stuff in your campaigns too. And even if you're just into this hobby for the action, love raises the stakes of the action and provides a palate cleanser so the action is exciting again. You can see this in Star Wars. Now, I'm not saying that when I wanted to get romance into my home game, I was doing it out of some guilt that without sex, this hobby was somehow juvenile. I also wasn't trying to make my players kiss because I was like, you know, ethically, for future diversity of the games industry, we all have to be horny. It's just 4 years ago, I was putting a lot of time and a lot of heart into making my home games as good as possible for me, but also for everyone else. And I knew that the stories we tell would be full of more options and surprises and intensity if we could kind of crack this idea that role-playing romance was cringe. Or think of it this way. It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. I'm getting too hot, I'm gonna take my clothes off. Something that people have noticed about role-playing games is that because our stories aren't planned, story is often something you realize kind of as it's happening or even after the session is over. Imagine that these are the different kind of plot threads or themes running through a role-playing night. There are moments where entirely coincidentally, because of someone's decisions or the dice, these plot threads kind of cross over or resonate with one another. You go like, oh my God, it's so amazing that you betrayed the villain because that's exactly how your brother betrayed you when you were a kid. Or like down here, it might be like, okay, I'm gonna destroy the magic sword. Oh no, wait. I can't destroy the magic sword because if I keep it, then I might have a chance to save my homeland. And then someone else is like, you're not going to destroy the magic sword? I'm not going to destroy the magic sword! These moments where two or more plot elements cross over in something that is serendipitous but feels like rhyming, feels ironic, feels like maybe growth, those are when your home game will feel the most like a story, when it feels the most elegant or mythic or surprising. And here's the thing. When you add romance or sex appeal into your story, all you're doing is creating more plot elements, right? Which means there are then more moments for that serendipity. It's, you're not going to destroy the magic sword? I'm not going to destroy the magic sword, but I love you and I want you to destroy it. Well, I guess I don't love you anymore. And it's better. Does that make sense? Or like something that I teach into my players and try and repeatedly drill into them every time we're making characters for a new campaign is that everyone wants to go and make their own personal little blorbo and be like, this is my character. And I tell them, that's cool, that's fine. But the quality of your character will not determine how much fun you have playing them or how interesting you are. What's way more important than your blorbo is your relationship to other players around the table. You can play a boring person with an interesting relationship to everyone else. That character will be 100 times more satisfying to play and better for the story than if you make someone fascinating but who has no relationship to anyone else. I've done a whole video about this on the Quinns Patreon before. You can see it here. But my point is that love and sex appeal and attraction, all of that is the spiciest and strongest and most interesting form of human relationship. And there's something else here, which is love forces people to act unreasonably. And this is why it's used in movies all the time, because as the stakes of a story get higher and higher and higher, eventually what would be reasonable in a story is for the protagonist to be like, okay, you know what? I'm ducking out of this story. But if they're in love, they don't duck out and they stay in it. And so as the stakes get higher, they don't turn away. And then that's how you get basically a movie. This is in my head because I just rewatched the episode recently. But there's an episode of Community where famously autistic coded character Abed narrates a Halloween story where all the characters in that story act super rationally at all times. And the point of that skit is that when people are acting rationally, you don't get a story. Conversely, I'll just lay this out as simply as possible. If you want a story, that comes from drama. If you want drama, that comes from people acting irrationally. If you want people acting irrationally, that most easily comes from heartache or desire or love. So, that is my perhaps arguably insanely aggressive pitch as to why we should be bringing romance into our home role-playing games. But if you're watching this and thinking, man, I could never in a million years get the players in my home game to role-play sexuality, listen, I don't think the players in my home games are built or were built particularly different from yours. Most of my players had no theatrical background. They were in existing romantic relationships, sometimes with each other, which makes all this complicated. And most importantly, when they sat down to roleplay with me for the first time, almost all of them found the act of just speaking in character super cringe. So I've been exactly where you are. There were times in my home games when I was thinking to myself, I am never, ever going to succeed at my goal of making my players kiss, ever. They will never do it. But I am now speaking to you like a weird self-help coach and saying that 4 years on from me stating that as my goal, my slightly aggressive and sure, somewhat problematic efforts succeeded. You're the one and only, can't take that away from me. So today I have a pod of about 12 players. These are abstract representations of what they look like. They're much more handsome in person. So if we were to break my 12 players down into 3 categories here, up at the top, I have 5 players in my home games who will create and initiate plot lines to do with romance and sex. I have 4 more who are a little bit cooler on it, who will certainly think about their character as a sexual being and perhaps leave them in a relationship at the start of the campaign, even if they don't necessarily want to pull them out of it, so to speak. And finally, I have 3 players in my home games who are probably like the most cool and like, I'd say uninterested in doing romantic or sexual scenes. Does that mean they don't do it? No, even these 3 players who I'm not like comfortable calling them my holdouts or anything, but these 3 players will do scenes about attraction if I prompt them. It's just that I need to prompt them or perhaps give them an NPC that's flirting with them first. They won't necessarily flirt back, but they won't balk at the idea of me creating something fun. And I think a big part of that is that when you take like this person here and put them in a table of people who are all comfortable, this player does become more comfortable. The magic circle is a trip. In other words, if I may allow myself a little gloat, I did it! I did it! I took a table of players who would all cringe out their skin at the idea of narrating a kiss in front of one another and got them to the point that not just they could do that, but where that stuff happens at my home games and the rest of the players watching are like enjoying it. I'm aware I've been drawing a lot of stuff that look like NFL strategy diagrams. If this was an NFL strategy diagram, it would be a winning strategy where I won all of the balls. One of my home games right now has 2 players who made the choice that their player characters are in this like on again, off again, and quite toxic sexual relationship. It's very funny, it's endearing, it's sweet, super good. I've got another player who's creating fabulous problems for his player character because he's decided that she is really romantically interested in an NPC who does not respect her. It's cutting, it's sad, and it's causing him to role play his character very differently. Super interesting. And for me, like a lot of people on the Quinns Patreon have been like, Quinns, stop burning yourself out. Be a player in someone else's campaign. I am. I'm a player in my friend Rob's campaign, and I decided in that campaign I would basically be a fuckboy and be like, this will be interesting. And I'm gonna explore some of my relation to masculinity a little bit. And I had sex with exactly 2 NPCs before discovering that that was super dark and really interesting, and it taught me things about myself. And yeah, that character stopped fucking around pretty quickly. So if you want some of this energy in your home games, if you want to take your relationship with your other players to the next level, it's quite hard to talk about all this stuff without coming across as a huge creep. For the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking you through how I think you can do that. And I will also be talking about how I kind of failed to do that. Like if this is your journey, I've got my own personal like baby step style journey, which was slow and awkward, and I metaphorically fell over a lot. By the way, I feel like I've been speaking a lot in this video as if you, the person watching this, is a GM. That's not my intention at all. I think I can tend to default to that language because I read a lot of comments and Discord posts from people who are part of my community, and they do tend to be GMs. But let me just say, for the rest of this video, the tips I will be giving to kind of like make a table of players more comfortable with role-playing romance and, you know, even getting a lot out of it themselves, I think are just about all applicable for if you're a player watching this, and not just for GMs. So yeah, I just might sometimes use my language as if you are a GM, but don't worry, I see you, and you're great. So lesson number 1, do not ever do what I did and tell your players you want them to kiss. It's awkward, it's stupid, it's counterproductive. Here's what you do instead. Show your players how much more entertaining their game can be by adding romance. I so got my journey off to the wrong start. I remember in my campaigns of Spire and then my campaign of Heart afterwards, after my players made their characters, being like, so do any of you, do you think, fancy one another? This is a group of friends who'd known each other and been drinking together for years. Like, I couldn't have done more of a job of sticking my fingers into a nest and being like, are there any hornets in here? Instead, what I should have done, what you should do, is add scenes and plot twists to your home game that give your players more of what they're there for, which probably is to be entertained and to have a laugh. Let me explain what this looks like, and then I'm going to explain why you will all benefit from this in the long run. So I used to be a player in a campaign of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay run by Kieran Gillen, who you might know as the creator of Die, the avant-garde postmodern role-playing game. And Kieran did this scene where he introduced us to an elf NPC who was basically a quest giver, and he told us that she was the most beautiful woman any of us had ever seen. The result was just absolute sitcom nonsense. Me and the other two players immediately began role-playing, like stumbling over our words, trying to like pose and flex, trying to take one another down a peg in front of her in whatever creative ways we could. That's an example of a scene that introduces sex into a role-playing game, but as players, we didn't have to be vulnerable. We were just having a laugh role-playing awkward men. Or here's another example that I actually used from a campaign that I was running just last year. I had an NPC come up to one of my players and declare his love for her. He shot his shot, and I did this knowing that that player character would have absolutely no interest in this NPC. So then the scene becomes like, do you shoot down this NPC? Do you try and let them down gently? Or do you maybe like go on a date with them to spare their feelings? And this is asking a player to do something a bit awkward, but it's not really asking them to be vulnerable. And most importantly, it creates a scene that is absolutely hilarious for everyone else at the table. After that NPC like shot his shot and that player character kind of let him down, but in a way that wasn't like a hard no, I then immediately had a running joke that I could bring back whenever I wanted. I did a scene next session where that player character was like in her tent, like, you know, taking care of some clothes. I had all the other players throw in atmospheric details as to why this was like, you know, like a tender alone moment for this player character. None of my players knew where this scene was going. And then after we'd framed it, I just had the NPC come into the tent, and that player, not the character, but the player went, oh no. We all fell about laughing. You could also use romance to give players rewards, perhaps in the form of an exciting plot twist, or more literally in the form of just loot. Perhaps the villain lets the players go this time because she's romantically interested in one of the players. Perhaps you reveal the villain is actually the ex-lover of the NPC the players think is the coolest. That's just juicy. Perhaps the players are partial to some gossip where they discover two NPCs they travel with are actually hooking up. Let the players see how they feel about that. Do they think that's quite sweet? Do they think this is going to end in tears? Or are they just practical about it? Like, hang on, wait, this could just be really bad for our ability to kill goblins. You could even use love to create a really interesting and spicy obstacle for the players in the campaign. Maybe they need to travel somewhere, but they can't because two NPCs are fucking, and now the players are like, do we break them up or do we appeal to them as a couple? So, if you follow those tips, your campaign will start to have some plot threads, some entertaining scenes to do with romance and attraction without anyone having to do anything embarrassing. But from here, one of the truths about role-playing is that it is subtly, invisibly competitive, right? People want their scenes, their contributions creatively to be exciting. And so if one player, maybe it's the GM, but maybe it's another player doing things like, you know, awkwardly fancying the blacksmith in a way that's quite funny for everyone else. If one player is getting a lot of like laughs or thrills from introducing romance, you will invisibly start getting the other players around the table thinking about it too. And just like that, your journey has begun. Lesson number 2. Do not do what I did and assume that romance equals kissing. Romance is being denied the kiss. I experienced a huge teachable moment in my campaign of Delta Green where within my player character's cell of policemen who were like investigating the paranormal, 2 of my players decided without consulting one another that they would be playing closeted gay men. Now, these two characters couldn't have had less in common. One was a paranormal podcaster and gun nut from the Deep South. The other one was a member of the State Department who spoke like 4 languages, could sail a boat, and wore a $4,000 suit. But Delta Green is all about bonds, right? And Delta Green is about how, as the campaign continues, the printed bonds with like your wife and your mother and your dog that are on your sheet steadily decay and are replaced with the bonds you create with the members of your cell, the people who've seen the shit that you have that you can't talk about. And so these two characters that were both in the closet, on some level, found one another. And they did so quite quickly, during moments where they would like share a cigarette together on a stakeout. Or there was a scene where the two of them broke into a hotel room together and found some paperwork, and one of them diligently went through it, while just a few feet away, the other one took a nap on the hotel bed. Like, very, very little happened in the scenes between these two player characters, but the atmosphere in them was heavy with like just the sense that these two psychologically broken men weren't reaching out to each other when they needed to, but also weren't pulling away. And then one evening, me and my players had wrapped up the session and we were just chatting shit, and I asked my players, hey, do you think your two characters will ever kiss? And as one, all my players rounded on me and were like, Quinns, you've absolutely misunderstood this relationship. It's so much more interesting that they don't kiss. The fact that there's this tension between the two of them and neither of them know what it is. And my players were absolutely right. There are so many forms that intimacy can take. And I was so busy watching for kisses like a pervert in the bushes that wasn't, you know, strictly like sexual or pornographic, but was even more interesting. Like when I was playing the Wild Sea, I had a player who was a Mothrin captain and another who was an ironbound first officer attend this ball together. And they didn't dance. They just got drunk. But then when they were on the way home, making their way through the dark alleyways of this city, one of them said to the other, you know, I very much would have liked to have danced with you. And then when no one was watching, where they could actually be allowed to do this, they span one another round and had a formal dance in the shadows. And they never spoke about it ever again. Or like, I'm thinking about when I played Apocalypse Keys with the players in my home games. And that is a game that is expressly about intimacy between different kinds of monster. Like the players in my home game was an alien, a fairy, a god, and a monster that didn't even know what it was. And that was a game where kissing was definitely on the table. Like the designer of that game has said that the alternate working title for that game was actually Apocalypse Kisses. And my players didn't kiss in that game. They might have done if we played for longer, but instead there was something that actually was intellectually richer, because my players spent the entire campaign trying to figure out their relationship to one another. Like, were they colleagues? Were they siblings? Were they lovers? And what was awesome about that is it meant that any scene between any two characters, anything could happen. That's exciting. Conversely, quite soon, either before or after I was playing Apocalypse Keys, I played Good Society, a game that is expressly about romance, and which, yes, my players actually did kiss. We had some kissing, and yet it was so empty. And even when it happened, I didn't consider this like, oh my God, I've hit the milestone I've been waiting for years. I didn't really notice. When my players kissed, there was this kind of like, yay, around the table, because, you know, those two players had done something a bit like embarrassing, and, you know, we'd all been waiting for that moment. But it wasn't interesting. But that makes sense, because if you think about why kisses are exciting when we see them in movies, it's because usually we're not totally expecting them. And it's about what the kiss expresses. It expresses that those two characters are throwing caution to the wind, or that they actually do fancy each other, or they're going to give this a shot, or whatever. But if we're thinking about what's interesting about role-playing games, this hobby, the whole heart of it is that we go into a scene not knowing what's going to happen, sometimes because a player makes a choice, sometimes because someone rolls a dice. So the exciting part about kissing in role-playing games is if it will happen and when it will happen, not the kiss itself. And actually, like, that is something that's true in just wider storytelling. Indulge me for a moment here. I'd like to give you an anecdote from my actual favorite romantic story. It's Maison Ikoku by the astonishingly talented manga artist Rumiko Takahashi, who also made Ranma, which is the inspiration for Scott Pilgrim, if any of those words mean anything to you. But basically, Maison Ikoku is a romantic comedy set in a guest house run by this woman called Kyoko. And Kyoko is a widower. Her husband has just died, and she's been left running this big house full of difficult tenants. And then one day, the other protagonist, Yusaku, moves in. And he is a 20-year-old. He's just applying for colleges now. He's much younger than Kyoku, but immediately these two become besotted with one another. Now, this manga runs for like 7.5 years. And at the very end of that run, hundreds and hundreds of issues later, basically Yusaku becomes a man and they get together. That's not a spoiler. You could read like 2 issues of this manga and know that's how it's going to end. But there's this one panel in Maison Ikoku that just knocked the wind out of me. And what it is that Kyoko and Yusaku are out in Tokyo arguing about their situation. They've spent years together at this point. They've never hooked up. And she says to him, like, she wheels on him and says, "What do you want? Sex?" And he goes, "Yes." And then the next panel, they've had sex. Like this manga has been running for 5 years, and then the two of them are just suddenly in bed, like clothes off, staring at the ceiling, and they've done it. And it's not quite an anticlimax. It's violating for you as the reader, but the realization that the author is forcing on you, and I mean like really forcing, is that this isn't an anticlimax because she's saying the sex isn't the climax. Like this woman getting over her dead husband and Yusaku growing up, that's the climax, that's the journey. The sex will always be meaningless unless they can have the kind of sex where they actually accept each other. And because they had sex before they were at that moment, they've actually just really harmed their relationship. And I think about that anecdote a lot in terms of romance and sex in role-playing games, because I guess we all live in such a sex-obsessed society that it's easy to think like, oh, if we end up narrating a scene of sex in our role-playing game, that's like a sign that we're comfortable with anything, right? And it's like, I mean, yeah, it's a sign you're comfortable with anything, but it is in no way a sign that you understand story. And this hobby isn't about like having 18 rated stuff happen. It's about story. So in summary, what I'm saying here with lesson number 2 is if you want to bring romance or love or even sex into your game, that doesn't mean players have to, or even the GM has to narrate anything sexual, because all of these things, in terms of the drama they generate, in terms of the plot, in terms of the excitement, they all exist around like the pornographic elements of this stuff. Or like, let me put it another way. If a player is narrating them making out with someone, that's almost certainly going to be gross to everybody. But if a player wants to make out with someone, that's fun and exciting for everybody. The most excitement you will ever have in terms of love and romance at your gaming table is the GM narrating stuff that the players can't reach, and the players deciding that they want things they can't have. None of which involves any of you narrating someone's codpiece or corset being torn asunder. I wrote that line in the script thinking it would sound ridiculous. It actually sounds kinda hot. Just making a note for later. And finally, lesson number 3 of getting more romance in your home games. Do not forget that anything you add to the story should be making everyone at the table happier and more into the game. Do remember everyone's comfort levels. So the excellent podcast, Not Another D&D Podcast, trialed this series for a while called D&D Court, where their listeners wrote in with questions and then their like editorial team would answer them. Some of these are on YouTube, and one segment from one of these YouTube videos is just like one of my favorite pieces of RPG content ever. So basically in this segment, they talk about how a GM is hitting on a player by creating a romantic plotline, and it will just make you cringe until your body resembles that of a desiccated orange. I'll include a full link to the video in the description, but for now, here's just a clip.
Me and my long-term girlfriend are currently playing in a campaign with an old friend of mine as the DM. My girlfriend's character is involved in a passionate relationship with an NPC played by the DM, and I'm starting to feel uncomfortable during their role-playing scenes. I wouldn't mind except for two things. Firstly, I've played D&D with my friend for about 5 years, and he's never expressed interest in role-playing romance before as a player or as a DM, and he hasn't pursued it with other characters in the campaign. Secondly, a few months ago, my friend told me while drunk that he has feelings for my girlfriend and he would never try anything, but thought I should know. At the time, I told him it was okay. He can't control his feelings after all. But now it kind of seems like he is trying something. I haven't spoken to my girlfriend about it for fear I'm overreacting. But justices, I have to know, am I being a jealous Jake?
You need to talk to everyone about this. You need to talk to your girlfriend immediately.
For sure. Please go and watch that whole segment. It's so funny. I rewatch it like on my lunch break about once a year. I include it here to say that it simply wouldn't be safe for me to be like here encouraging you to get romance and sex into your home games without also telling you to just be safe about it. Just about all of the most horrific stories of all time within the role-playing community come from people who've showed up at someone's home game and there's been a romantic or sexual component that they were not comfortable with. I'm talking about players pursuing a romance which is really a bleed of their personal feelings towards another player. I'm talking about players forcing a sexual plot that other players around the table are not comfortable with. If people have seen this video from the Quinns Patreon, I basically did that myself. But I'm also just more generally talking about the fact that the act of role-playing involves this magic circle where we all sit down and agree we're going to do something a bit embarrassing and we're going to take it seriously. When someone changes the rules of what's embarrassing or what's expected, suddenly it can just shatter a group's trust, let alone their enjoyment of an evening. And gosh, there are so many ways that romance can be weird. Let's get my NFL diagram out again. I can't get no satisfaction. Like, you might have two players around the table who are a couple and so are experiencing very different boundaries to everyone else. You might have one player around the table who's really uncomfortable with romance that everyone else is doing. You might have one player who's comfortable role-playing romance with the GM, but then a player who also wants to do romance with that player, maybe because they fancy them a little bit, misinterprets that and starts creating a relationship that this player isn't comfortable with. All of this is also assuming that none of you are one another's exes. Or like, there can be other, slightly more harmless but subtle stuff. Like, the players around my table were generally all comfortable doing or even initiating romantic plotlines if the other player was the same gender as them, whereas cross-gender romantic relationships, that felt like a whole other mountain to climb. Now, in situations where players might have different boundaries around different content, the role-playing community's default answer to this is to get players to use safety tools. You might have heard of the X card or something called script change. Probably you own a role-playing game where one of these safety tools is referenced in the manual saying, definitely use this. But for years, I explained these tools to my players. I put them on my tables and my players never once used them. Not ever, not even close. Not even when I said you will gain an experience point this first session of the campaign if you use a safety tool. I've also spoken to big designers in the TTRPG community, people who espouse these exact safety tools in their game. And I've said, has anyone ever used a safety tool in your home game? And they have said, no. I guess what I'm saying here is I don't think these safety tools are bad if you're in an environment that feels so unsafe that everyone's kind of got these tools in their pocket at any time. But in home games, I think they just don't take into account a lot of subtle social dynamics. I think people simply just forget they're there. For starters, my players forget all the actual rules of a game every time we play any game. I don't expect them to remember the safety tool as well. There's also the fact that in home games, I think players tend not to realize that they've been hurt by subject matter until after the session is over. That's huge. There's also the fact that, like, the way all these tools work is that when you say, I want to skip this scene or I want to cut this scene, what's baked into the safety tools is no one is allowed to ask you why, right? And that's okay if you're playing with strangers, but in a home game, you want to like you're all having fun playing a scene, then you're expecting a player to be like, cease, as if they're the fucking announcer in Robot Wars. If you're with your friends, that means everyone's attention is immediately on you, which is the opposite of what you want if you're triggered. Anyone being traumatized by a role-playing game never wants more attention, they want less. And if you're playing with your friends, using a safety tool means it's like all eyes on you. It's all anyone's going to be thinking about for the rest of the evening. So your mileage may vary, but for me, if you want to be safe when you're exploring difficult themes, in my home games, I simply don't think safety tools cut it. Here's the one thing that I've found has worked for me that I'm going to recommend you folks do instead. When you bring in these themes, this difficult subject matter into your games, just go really slow. I would like to point out that for all my glee at getting hornier content into my home role-playing games, I was at this for 4 years. And like, if there was something I could have done to have arrived at this point in 2 years, I don't think I wanted to do that. I'm really quite comfortable with it taking as much time as it took. I'll also point out that like the campaigns that I'm in right now are the most romantic and sexual that I've ever been part of. But actually, after my 4 years, I haven't completed this journey. The campaigns I run next year, I'm sure I'm going to be even more like adult and confident. And the campaigns like in 3-4 years, what are they going to be like? I don't know, but probably they're going to be super awesome and go to some wild places. But still, we've made real progress in 4 years, but it was 4 years of learning one another's preferences, of learning to trust one another. 4 years of a player being like, I'm going to take a bit of a risk in this scene and narrating something. And then all of us seeing how we feel about it. And then all of us being like, okay, that was cool, actually. I really like that. Did everyone else like that? Yeah, no, you did great. Really love that. Please do more stuff like that. Like, let me give you a case study, actually, from one of my home games. So this was just 2 weeks ago, right? I'm in a campaign right now with Emily, who you'll know from the Quinns Actual Play Show. Play to find out. She's amazing. And our relationship as role players has gotten to the point now where her character was basically a pub. And the bartender, played by me, was quite attracted to her character, I decided, and hit on her in a way that was not played for laughs, that was just kind of like bawdy and seedy. And she accepted these flirtations and even flirted back a little bit in a way that was very transactional to get not information she wanted out of the barkeep. And then after that, they ended up arguing together and it all became quite dark and bitter and intense. And at the end of it, Emily said to me like, yeah, I really liked that scene actually, Quinns. That was cool. And I was like, hey, good. Because I was putting myself out there, like being this character. And so that's a scene that we did kind of tepid, like not particularly spicy, but still. I had to check in with her. She had to check in with me. I had to check in with her partner who was at the table just to make sure we were all okay. We were all okay. It was good. But then I realized I've never done a scene like that with any of my male players. I've never hit on them in a way that wasn't for comedic value, but was just tiresome and patriarchal. Why is that? I had to ask myself. And I came up with a few reasons, but the only really true answer to that question is, I don't know. You see what I mean? Role-playing romance at the table is complicated and thorny and risque. And like I say, I'm 4 years into this and I'm still figuring this stuff out. Me and my players are all having a blast doing it, but we are going slow. And I'd encourage you to as well. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And before you go, let me ask/beg you. I would so love to hear your stories of high-minded epic romance and just filth, just total smut, just you and your friends turning each other on at your role-playing games, in your home tables. Also, just your advice for other people that I might have missed as to how to get people more comfortable with romance, how to elevate our stories with romance. Because if one thing is true on the Quinns Patreon, it's that I'm comfortable in giving you folks advice, but the crowdsourced knowledge base of my brilliant patrons tends to just produce like nuggets of absolute genius, and I would love to know what you folks have to say. I mean it though. I think in 5 years, my campaigns are going to be fucking nuts. I'm going to be chasing that high and I'm going to be going to some unbelievably dark places. And we'll see if any of you can even still relate to Quinns Quest at that point. I'm very excited to find out. Take care, everybody.